Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session about inclusive climate outreach in the American South. Today, we're going to talk to you all about how we work together in the region to build inclusive chapters that promote equity with diverse representation. Because we only have 20 minutes today, we probably won't be able to take questions, but please don't hesitate to reach out to us at the email addresses we'll provide at the end of the talk. So we'll be your host today. I am Princella Talley, and I'm a development associate with CCL's development team, and I'm also a diversity outreach coordinator.
Hi, and I am Susan Adams, the regional coordinator for the Third Coast, which includes Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. Thanks so much for being here today. So we are going to discuss the unique ways we work here in the Third Coast. We will be reviewing our successes and how we work in solidarity with intersectional community efforts, the historical context we acknowledge as we do climate advocacy work here in the Deep South, and what our diversity, equity, and inclusion work entails. So I have had the great pleasure of working with Princella for a couple of years now on outreach in the American South. And during this time, I have learned a whole lot. I'm going to share with you some thoughts about solidarity and some of the successes we've had. As the regional coordinator in the Third Coast, which as I mentioned includes Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, my work focuses on supporting group leaders and volunteers, helping grow and develop chapters, as well as congressional and outreach strategy. One of my top priorities, however, is helping volunteers make breakthroughs in their personal and political power, which is really central to everything we do here in the Citizens Climate Lobby. This is where Princella and I have found incredible opportunities to collaborate and work together here in the South. In the process, we forged new paths and relationships and found new directions to take our work to help us all achieve our goals, everyone. So I wanted to start by sharing something I read in an important piece in the Washington Post by marine biologist Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. In it, she says, and I'm going to quote her here, "If we want to successfully address climate change, we need people of color, not just because pursuing diversity is a good thing to do, and not even because diversity leads to better decision-making and more effective strategies, but because Black people are significantly more concerned about climate change than white people, 57% versus 49%. And Latinx people are even more concerned, 70%. To put that in perspective, it means that more than 23 million Black Americans already care deeply about the environment and could make a huge contribution to the massive amount of climate work that needs doing. But then she goes on to point out another important intersection of climate and race. For people of color, the already hard work of fixing the climate becomes nearly impossible when you throw in racism and bigotry. She says, so to white people who care about maintaining a habitable planet, I need you to become actively anti-racist. I need you to understand that our racial inequality crisis is intertwined with our climate crisis. If we don't work on both, we will succeed at neither. And I'm going to share the link to this piece in the chat in a little bit, because you should really read the whole thing. It's amazing. Okay, so with that context in mind, let me tell you about the outreach work that Princella has included me in here in the Third Coast. Working with Princella is not only one of my favorite parts of this job, but also one of the most rewarding. She has supported and welcomed me as part of her cohort in doing the important work of raising underrepresented voices and creating a space where everyone feels supported and heard. Princella talks about the importance of psychological safety when building a team, and she'll say more about that later. And she has applied that to me too, always making me feel safe as I have worked at getting over my anxiety and discomfort as a white person and getting off the sidelines. Princella shared this wonderful quote with me that you see on the slide from Feminista Jones. "We need to be more than allies. We should be co-conspirators." And this has been a key to our working together. We have had an absolute ball being co-conspirators here in the Third Coast. And again, you should really read this whole article. It is amazing, and I'll put that in the chat in a while. Princella has shown me that to support her and her work, I just need to roll up my sleeves and be with her. I'm not here to tell others what they need to do or figure it out for them. I'm here to ask what I need to do. So as a co-conspirator, what does solidarity look like? Okay, well, it's pretty easy. You start with listening, and then you keep listening, and then you listen some more and some more. I mean it, like you really have to listen. As climate advocates who feel extreme urgency around this issue and know lots and lots of facts, I think we often feel compelled to tell. But no, zip it. This is where you have to just slow down, stop, and listen. And you're gonna find climate change is so intersectional, it means it affects everything, that you'll find that it relates to almost every single conversation that you'll have. But you know, don't jump in and do the explaining. Let those connections come about naturally, and you'll find yourself learning more about climate and its direct impacts on communities near you than you ever thought possible. So to illustrate this with an example, oh, wait a minute, I've actually forgotten a piece, so I'm gonna go back. Because before I give you my example, I have to tell you how we get there. Princella and I brainstorm weekly on ways to engage and elevate the voices of people of color by offering leadership positions throughout the region, which includes things like group leaders, state coordinators, but also thought leaders. We promote and celebrate intersectional community work, and we do what we can to invite diversity of thought. We also support the implementation of unique ideas so that people feel heard and valued, and now I will tell you about one of those ideas. So one example of our brainstorming sessions was our Third Coast Regional Conference in February of this year, which seems like 100 years ago. Princella has spent years building strong relationships within her community in Alexandria, Louisiana, including other nonprofits in the area, the Good Hope Baptist Church, and teachers at the Alexandria Middle Magnet Junior High School. The principal of that school even endorsed our policy in 2017, thanks to the relationships that they developed there. When thinking about how to inspire and engage on a deeper level, Princella came up with this crazy idea. What if we bring 30 of the middle schoolers to our conference in Houston, along with mentors from the community? So I was just like, are you kidding me? That's insane. But then we both said, or is it? Actually, this is a really cool idea. So we decided to take the risk and make it happen. In the end, we had 47 people from Alexandria, Louisiana attend our conference, driving 4 hours each way in a bus. We had a mix of youth and adults, 44 of whom were Black. The adults were teachers, leaders of other nonprofits, and members of the Good Hope Baptist Church. The pastor of the church even said a prayer with the students and mentors in the early morning hours before they left to make the trip to Houston for our conference. At the conference, Princella and I knew that we needed to create access. And we did that with an agenda that would both include our new friends, as well as give them the space and time to learn and have fun. I think we can all imagine how overwhelming it can be to walk into a room of seasoned, enthusiastic CCL volunteers for anybody when you are a newbie. Like Princella says, we don't just say that we care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to show it, and we want people to feel it. And as a result of our outreach, the school in Alexandria went home and decided to develop an environment and global health curriculum for the 2021 school year. And we've taken steps to help support that effort. Our regional diversity has increased dramatically, and we now have more representation across socioeconomic backgrounds as well, which is also crucially important. And with that, I am now going to pass the microphone back to Princella.
Of course, I would start muted. Thank you, Susan. I cannot begin to explain how great it is to work with you and how inspired I am by the results of our co-conspiring in the region. So now that you all have a better understanding of our working relationships and successes in the Third Coast, I'm going to dive more into some historical context of our region, because the history of where we have been is deeply embedded into our modern culture and our ways of thinking today. And our history also gives us more guidance into how we should and should not approach our climate advocacy and DEI work. So the Third Coast region is also where I primarily focus my DEI efforts, and nationally, I focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion within the Climate and Culture Action Team that I lead. And we prioritize engaging underrepresented youth and adults in areas that are economically disadvantaged. And this team is on community, and everyone is welcome to join it. So let's start with acknowledging our history, because it helps us to better understand why the CCL way may not always work here. And we have to redefine our approach in unique ways to speak to the spirit of the communities that we're looking to engage. These points are true, but they can also be a bit uncomfortable. But I know that we can move beyond this discomfort together as we reshape our current work and our work in the future. So let's go all the way back to the Reconstruction era. Divisive politics between Democrats and Republicans and racial tensions led to roughly 150 Black males being killed by white Southerners in Louisiana in what is now known as the Colfax Massacre. This actually happened on Easter Sunday, on April 13th in 1873 at the courthouse building. And this was done in an effort to retain the most authority. And the Black men that were killed there had actually been assigned to protect the courthouse. And they estimate that it was about 150 men killed, but it's highly likely it was a lot more than that, because the attacks went beyond that courthouse building and carried on into the night, specifically targeting African Americans. Now, to put that into context, Colfax, Louisiana, with that history, is roughly 30 minutes from my house right now. And in the late 1800s in Mississippi, Black males were registered to vote, but it declined from 90% to less than 6% because of the grandfather clause. And this clause allowed only those whose grandfathers was qualified to vote, that were qualified to vote before the Civil War. Only people who were related to them could also be registered to vote. Obviously, this wasn't applicable to Black people, right? Due to slavery, and it only benefited white citizens. Poll taxes, which were required to be paid 2 years in advance, were also put in place to vote. And of course, those who had been enslaved could not pay it. And at an 1890 convention to write a new state constitution in Mississippi, leaders of that convention publicly announced, "We came here to exclude the Negro." Similarly, in 1927, Nix's versus Herndon was brought to the Supreme Court because Texas passed a law forbidding Blacks from participating in Democratic primary elections. And we also can't forget about the literacy test, where the clerks would challenge formerly enslaved Black males to explain complex passages in order to vote. But many white people were given easier passages to decipher. And those practices were passed along throughout our Southern region and throughout the country. So I really invite you to pause and think about the amount of energy and the emotional fortitude that it requires residents of communities that have been the most disadvantaged by these political systems to ask them to not only focus on climate, but to do it in a bipartisan way. So your job is to build trust with patience and understanding. It's not to be overly enthusiastic and think that everyone's going to advocate for policies in the same way that you do. These experiences came to us differently. And I'm bringing this up because most of us think about disenfranchisement, but we aren't thinking about the emotions and the traumas and the generational knowledge of what happened. And that lends to the high levels of mistrust that a lot of people have. So with that in mind, how do we approach diversity and inclusion in this region? So we touched on our diversity. Oh, I went too far ahead. Let me back it on up like Susan. Okay, so diversity and inclusion is not a numbers game or a corporate goal. It's a lifestyle commitment to accept and believe the experiences of those who are different from you and to not challenge their perspectives. So I want to repeat some advice I shared about team building when I presented for the Tornadoes Regional Conference in early March, because I feel like it can't be said enough. I want everyone to think in an innovative way and not be afraid to take risk, and to also reduce their defensiveness so that we can make sound decisions together. But none of these things can happen if we don't have a strong sense of psychological safety. Amy Edmondson, the Harvard Business School professor, defines psychological safety as a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. Basically, we want people to feel comfortable about being themselves and to not be silenced. And Karina, our diversity manager, is also heavily in tune with psychological safety and how to create that culture. And we should all be, right? Because if your goal is to recruit and retain a membership that's truly diverse, people have to see that many different thoughts and ideas are welcomed and encouraged. You have to do your homework. You have to pass the mic to leaders who are not the usual suspects, and you have to accept the discomfort that can arise from solutions that conflict with your lived experiences. It's up to you and your chapter members or your community members to learn ways to implement strategies that create a culture of psychological safety. You have to do that before you start inviting other people in. So we've touched on our diversity and inclusion work, and now let's talk about equity. As defined by Northeastern University, equity can have a lot of different definitions depending on the context. But I love this definition because it says that at its core, the concept involves giving everyone in a situation the specific tools they need to succeed. Most of us are familiar with Climate Interactive's flower model that places climate protection at the center of the primary components that lend to a thriving community. As a climate advocate, you can work together on these intersecting key issues because more often than not, community leaders are already engaged regarding other concerns that can still be connected to climate. And inequities are at the root of these negatively impacted regions. So to achieve true equity, people of color must be involved as leaders and as participants in decisions that are being made. Acknowledge those differences instead of seeking feel-good narratives, because what will feel really good for you and for everyone else is being at the table with diverse leaders who can be their authentic selves and voice their views, which leads to more comprehensive solutions. So the way we approach inclusive climate outreach is by thinking about how we can take actions in an equitable way. That means we aren't working in a way that prioritizes our wants. We work as multi-sector collaborators. We work on intersectional climate issues, as Susan and I have both mentioned, and we strive to create mutually beneficial relationships. Those benefits are assessed by what community members need, and we benefit by witnessing those breakthroughs in personal power and political will, which is our mission, right? But what we know is that genuine efforts towards diversity, equity, and inclusion is how we're going to create that framework for just climate solutions. As civil rights activist D. Ray McKesson says, justice that is not rooted in equity, in social welfare, and in community is not justice at all. And on that note, I'd suggest starting at the tips you see here. Learn community issues and concerns, identify the barriers, work in solidarity with community leaders, create access, and remember to live your commitment. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and feel free to reach out to me and or Susan with any questions you have. We'd be happy to hear from you. And on that note, please enjoy your break or stay here and watch this video and take an action to write to Congress. We hope you have fun at your next session. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.